In conversations I've had recently, I've come to observe that many people, regardless of age or circumstance, are lonely despite being in relationships, which might not make sense to at first. Because if you're in a relationship, then how can you be lonely? And it's because we oftentimes mistake the difference between being alone and lonely. Being alone, as I just described, is a state of being when you are objectively on paper by yourself, just like I am sitting on my fire escape. You can be alone whether you're in a romantic relationship or not. Loneliness, on the other hand, is a feeling, one you experience when there's a scarcity or a lack of connection, whether it's in the form of quantity, time, right? Or in most cases, what it actually is, quality, the quality of the connection you have. And I've experienced this myself plenty of times, and I couldn't quite put a finger on it until I reflected more on this. And perhaps you can relate as well. Maybe you're in a room full of people, people you consider your friends, yet you feel like you're on the outside looking in. Maybe you go home for the holidays and you're with family, yet you feel this emptiness. Or maybe you're just by yourself in your room, you can't sit still, you can't be with your thoughts and feelings. You need to distract yourself in any way, shape, or form. And this is really what loneliness is this mismatch in the quality of the connection that you need, the quality of connection that nourishes you personally. And really, what it boils down to, the quality of the connection you have, is vulnerability. The ability to be vulnerable, or as Brene Brown defines it as, uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. It's like a turtle flipping itself so that its soft stomach is upwards and it's not protected by its hard shell. It's when you take off the armor you've built around yourself, this stoic exterior, in order to protect yourself from being hurt, susceptible, and exposed to harm. The thing is, just as much as we experience joy, happiness, to be human is to also experience the other side of the coin: pain, sorrow, grief. and so forth. And when we deny ourselves that quintessential part of the human spectrum of feeling, we deny ourselves the right to be human. Because to be human is to be vulnerable. And ultimately, when we're not vulnerable with ourselves, we don't fully see ourselves. We don't fully know ourselves. Just as you would with sitting with a stranger in a room for the first time, you don't feel totally at ease because you don't know this person, you don't trust this person. And the same goes with yourself. When you're not vulnerable with yourself, when you don't know these deep parts of yourself, you're essentially a stranger. So when you're in a room alone, you don't feel comfortable. You feel disconnected from yourself. You feel lonely. I remember my senior year of college, I lived with 3 roommates, and I was on the first floor. My roommates were in the basement. And I kid you not, I would get lonely just being in my room. And I would go downstairs to see what all the commotion was about, to just be around my roommates, because I couldn't be alone with myself. I couldn't do anything really by myself for extended periods of time, right? Couldn't go to the dining hall alone. If I did, I had to distract myself with my phone or headphones in. Couldn't go for walks alone. Couldn't just spend time alone. Because you don't oftentimes spend or want to spend time with strangers. And that's the thing, is that when you don't know yourself, when you're not vulnerable, when you don't have a strong relationship with yourself, you are a stranger, you're also a stranger to those around you, to those you believe are your friends. Because ultimately, there are parts of you that make you who you are. The parts that, quite honestly, are more defining than what people see. Because oftentimes, what shapes who you are, it's what's beneath the surface. It's like an iceberg, right? You can see what's on top, the surface level qualities of somebody, the surface level knowledge of somebody, but what really drives them on a day to day is what's hidden beneath the surface, what's in the dark, tucked away behind a shield of armor, a shell that others cannot see, but also what you cannot see. Things that, if I were to ask you, would you know how to answer? Questions like, what sort of trauma or baggage are you still holding on to? What did you need most as a child but did not receive? What are you really afraid of in life? What do you really want out of life? just some examples, but ultimately, questions that you hesitate to ask others because you hesitate to ask yourself. And without having an answer to these questions, they remain hidden. And so do the parts of you that remain hidden. And it's when you have these parts of yourself that are hidden in the dark, you feel uncertain about yourself. You feel like a stranger. You feel like you don't fully know yourself. When you start to exercise vulnerability, when you start to ask and answer these questions for yourself, you start to bring these parts of yourself into the light. With less skeletons in the closet, with less of what you do not know, you start to cultivate this relationship to yourself. You start to feel less lonely even when you're alone. Because that stranger is now a friend. And when you befriend yourself, and when you show up as yourself, your true self, right? Not just what's on the surface, but all that's beneath. And you make that openly seen, you open up the possibility to be seen by others, to connect with others, to build a quality connection so that you don't feel lonely. But the thing is, as much as this is arguably and honestly the most important factor, right, is the relationship with yourself and being vulnerable, it's not a perfect solution. Because, as we mentioned earlier, if the person you're with doesn't have a similar level of a relationship with themselves, a similar knowledge of themselves, then they too remain a stranger to you. Because at the end of the day, you can only meet someone as deeply as you've met yourself. And despite my own experience having cultivated this relationship myself, I've also experienced just this. I've experienced feeling the distance, not being as close with people I thought were my best friends at the time, people I truly thought would be the best man at my wedding. And there's nothing I can really do about that. I can still love and support them for who they are and where they're at in life. But I also have to be real with myself, honest with myself, that I can't make them change. I can't make them know themselves any more than they're willing to or able to. And as much as it's easy to just settle, maybe you're in that position, I'm here to tell you not to. Because so often in life, we settle, especially when it comes to relationships, whether romantic or platonic. We settle for these relationships, and all we end up doing is feeling lonely. When in reality, that time, that energy could be put towards cultivating the relationship with ourselves. So I don't know about you, but I want to minimize the amount of time I spend feeling lonely. And if that means being alone with myself, because I know myself, because I'm my own best friend, then so be it. But at the same time, what that also means is don't contain yourself. Don't try to squeeze yourself into a glass just so you can fit, just so you can get some shred of connection with someone else. Because ultimately, when you allow yourself to have no constraints, to be fully open, to be fully vulnerable, susceptible to whatever sort of emotional harm or danger may come your way, you open yourself up because you show up as your truest self. When you show up as your truest self and you open yourself up to whatever and whoever, then you invite in the possibility of a connection of depth you've never experienced before, of true connection, one that is built upon equal knowing of oneself and of each other. It's rare. It's rare to come across. I can tell you that. I don't have many friends who I consider on this level of depth and connection, but the ones I do have, I can't begin to describe how much I cherish them, how grateful I am for them, because they give me this sense of groundedness, of connection, of belonging, no matter time or distance apart. So I hope that this encourages you to reconsider your relationships that you currently have, that you're currently investing time or energy into, and consider if you should reinvest that time and energy into the relationship with yourself. To practice vulnerability, to know yourself so you can be vulnerable with others and know others as well. Because at the end of the day, that level of connection is what we all aspire for in life and what contributes to the level of happiness, level of meaning and fulfillment we experience. So, with that, I appreciate your time, and I'll see you tomorrow.